That's my producer that did that. Okay, everybody, hello, hello, and welcome to the show, GraceTime TV. It is a beautiful night here in Central Virginia, and I've got my special guest here with me tonight, Troy Spurrill, Dr. Troy Spurrill. He is tuning in from, I think, Minnesota this time.
Yes.
Yes, and he is from Synapse Center for Health and Healing. I don't know why that's so hard for me to say. Synapse Center for Health and Healing. Dr. Troy is one of our partners here, and you guys, some of you remember that we had a show back in January, and it was just the first time that we had connected here on the show. We're actually going to see each other live next month at a conference, so that's kind of exciting. It's always good to see people in our same network. But welcome back, Dr. Troy. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I very much appreciate it.
So we have a lot to talk about tonight. If anybody that's on my mailing list would have gotten the email announcing tonight's show, and I'm actually going to send out another email right this second to let people know that we are live because I know people get busy. There we go. So one person show here. All right. And so we're streaming tonight on multiple platforms. We're on YouTube, Facebook, Rumble, Clout Hub, Twitter, X, and somewhere Getter. And so some of the things that we're going to talk about, we are going to open the floor to questions. There's certain words that are like third rail words that we're going to avoid, and we're going to hope that you can read between the lines so that we can reach a wider audience across many, many platforms. And so, yes, we're going to sort of self censor, but the deeper conversations that you're going to have with Dr. Troy and his team really should happen in the private setting of a consultation anyway. But let's go. I want to start the conversation tonight by just asking you to tell our listeners once again just the basic premise of your practice and how you and your team do medicine. It's different from the standard doctor's office that most people are used to.
Yeah, so we use a foundational functional medicine approach. So it was put on my heart long, long time ago to become an agent of change when it comes to the healthcare field, because I had a personal journey that where I kind of fell through the cracks. So functional medicine is more proactive in nature, and it's meant to actually be a healthcare system model. So we look at the mental, chemical, and physical components of our body. And when there's a breakdown in communication, that leads to dysfunction. And then that dysfunction leads to disease. So any disease out there, like heart disease, or the top three, there's diabetes, there's heart disease, the big C, these different diseases happens for the most part slowly over time. And we can actually measure things that are out of balance before they actually become a disease process by just paying attention to levels of dysfunction. And so that's what we do. We measure dysfunction physically, chemically, and mentally. Chemically is usually lab work, dietary, and lifestyle factors become very important. And ultimately, we teach, we educate people about what is the uniqueness of their body. There's so much information out there that you could look up one thing on a topic of a diagnosis you've got, and there could be 120 different things to do. But what really matters is what are the three things that matter to your body, and that's what we primarily do and focus on.
Mhm. So when you say lab work, most people are familiar with the idea of getting their labs done. After a certain age, you go to the doctor and and they say let's get your blood work. And then you get usually either a phone call or not. Usually, if there's something unusual, they'll call you. If not, they just send you the results, or you have to log in and get your results. And it's kind of a non-event for most people. I mean, you hope it's a non-event. If anything, they're going to tell you that you have elevated triglycerides or something like that, and then they're going to prescribe a pill, a statin, and in some cases, you might have some blood sugar issues, and then you're gonna get another medication. Um, how is this different? You said that you're doing labs. What's different about your labs?
Well, Our labs, basically, we look at a lot of the same lab work, but in traditional medicine, they have small panels. They basically can only test a few things. So you'll go in and they'll look for the top 6 things that they want to try and identify. Our standard lab panel measures 93 different things.
Wow.
So when you're done with the lab, first of all, we work outside the insurance industry. So Medicare has a standard. It's standard 2251.3 that states care that seeks to prevent disease or promote health and well-being is not considered medically necessary. That's a problem. That's the problem
Yeah.
with the healthcare system. They're not interested in preventing disease. So because of that, insurance will only allow the doctors to order a small amount of labs. So we kind of bypass that. And if you the 93 labs that we run would cost about $1,600 if you ran it through Medicare or through insurance. We get it for $250 when we cut out insurance and just pay the lab directly.
Interesting.
So when you do that, we actually then look at the patterns in the blood work. So yes,
Mhm.
if cholesterol's high, that's one marker. If calcium's low, that's another one. So when you start to look at the big picture of all 93 on the panel, up to 98 on the panel, you start to see patterns. And so we actually generate a 33 to 36 page report going through the trends that are happening in your blood work. And I'll give you one of the most common because you've already kind of touched on it. We start to see, we'll measure something called C-reactive protein or cardiac reactive protein, blood
Mhm.
sugar, insulin, cholesterol, along with a full thyroid panel. And we can start to see a trend where the thyroid is starting to dip. So it's normal, but just barely normal. And then the same thing if the total protein, the albumin and globulin are just low normal, and the calcium is low, but still normal, and your cholesterol has shot up, you can take to the bank that that's a condition called hypochlorhydria, where you're not producing enough stomach acid, either because of stress or sleep disorder. And it leads to mineral imbalances with calcium, magnesium, iodine. So you start to see these organ systems start to slowly trend downwards. So it's very important. And in nutritional lab work, you've got your ranges. If it's outside
Mhm.
of those ranges, you've got an active disease process. But in functional medicine, they also look at what are the optimals. You've got this zone that's a little
Mhm.
small. These are the elite optimal ranges. So there's this gray zone that people will dive in and dive out of for years, and they have symptoms, but not a disease process. So when we actually pay attention to it, when it's a symptom, you can actually make significant changes. We've not ever had a patient get one of our reports and not be blown away about how much information. We could tell when they're trending towards a B vitamin deficiency. We can tell them without them telling us their symptoms. We can tell them when their GI tract has got like a bacterial problem, or we say you probably have a sleep disorder because we can tell your nervous system is not supporting
Mhm.
the production of enzymes. We can see diabetes years before it's diabetes, heart disease years before a stroke or a heart attack. We have that information. The science is out there. We just don't pay attention to it. Well, we do, but the nutritional system doesn't.
Mhm. That's really interesting. Speaking of diabetes, you talked about measuring insulin. Is that a fasting insulin test? Is that
Yes.
what that is? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just learning about that because I was just listening to a podcast today, and the doctor on the podcast, his name escapes me, I'll find it, but he was talking about the fact that traditional systems measure glucose, which is really the A1C, which is the composite of glucose measurements over time, and by that time, typically, they're looking for somebody who's pre-diabetic or diabetes, and you're saying that with fasting insulin, you can actually look for markers that will give you indicators well before people get into that range. That, to me, seems like incredibly valuable information.
Absolutely. So not only that, there's actual science out there that shows ratios. So if you take your glucose, your hemoglobin A1C, and your insulin, you can develop a ratio called HOMA-IR, which is like a predictor of insulin resistance,
Okay.
or HOMA-S, which is sensitivity of your cells, meaning your cells are not accepting insulin. A lot of times that's because there's inflammation around the cells. And so then those people will also develop a hypothyroid disorder. And how many I guarantee many of your listeners will look up thyroid or hypothyroid and say, I have those symptoms. Then they go in
Mhm.
and their thyroid labs are normal. Well, that's because you're making enough thyroid hormone, but the thyroid hormone's not getting inside the cell. Well, it's measured when you actually get the hemoglobin A1C with the insulin measurement, and you get that predictor of HOMA S. And then there's also what's called HOMA beta, where it can predict whether or not your pancreas is not making enough insulin, which
Mhm.
is more rare and more advanced. But you can see these things before you ever have the actual diabetes symptoms. It really manifests as something downstream, like a hypothyroid disorder.
Wow, that is really interesting, and again, hypothyroid, the first thing they do is put you on a synthetic thyroid, hormone, and then that comes with its own set of problems, right?
Yeah,
So let's say that you have somebody that comes in who is already pretty advanced. So they're past the point of predictive testing,
yeah.
and they're really in acute situations. They may not have identified it, but they're already there. What is an example? Well, let's say diabetes. Somebody is in type 2 diabetes. It's extremely prevalent in society throughout the world now, not just in the US, not just in Western culture, but it's a big problem. And so, we know that it's incredibly destructive to all of the vital organs, and it can lead to an early death. People don't die from diabetes, they die generally from heart problems, degeneration, congestive heart failure, those types of things. So what is the how can you treat people differently in that case if they already know they're pre-diabetic, or they're sitting at about, A1C of in the low sixes? That's still diabetes. There's still damage being done to their organs. What is an example of a protocol that you might do to help people?
Well, we've had people come in with hemoglobin A1Cs in the eights and nines. So we were uh, very much going to first tell them, don't get off your insulin. Stick with, if you're like,
Yeah.
stick with what you're taking. We're going to work with your prescribing physician, and we're going to teach your body how better to use and produce the insulin and use the sugar. So let me just kind of back up a little bit. The first thing that we're going to check is to make sure that their pancreas is actually still producing insulin.
Okay.
If it is, we got a shot to actually address this naturally. So I'm going to summarize 12 years of medical teaching here in 60 seconds.
I know that's a deep it was a big question I asked you, I
Yeah,
know.
I love it though. Um,
Okay.
so for all your cells to survive, there's a formula. I wrote this in my book 20 years ago.
Okay.
There's a formula for all your cells to survive. S equals A plus F. A equals the activation. So all our cells need to be activated, but F stands for fuel supply. So all of our cells need fuel, oxygen first and foremost, because we can only go about 10 minutes without oxygen. Then there's damage. But number two is glucose. We need glucose. That's how our body survives for the most part, especially our nerves. And so when you don't get the glucose in with the actual cell, then all of a sudden we see problems. And that's the complications of diabetes. It's the nerves that become damaged because they're not firing properly. So it's like trying to drive a car without gas in the tank. So that's first and foremost. So what we do with someone who comes in with already a well-established diabetes is we still go to what's the root cause. Now, I will say this, 90 to 95% of the time, it is diet and lifestyle.
Yeah.
So a sleep disorder like sleep apnea can cause it. Weight gain or obesity can cause it. Excessive sugar consumption can cause it. So all of those things we just assess. Is this person um, falling into any one of those categories? Here's a couple more. Inflammation can cause it. Now that inflammation can come from toxic food. So inflammatory food, sugar is very inflammatory, but it also can come from infections and medications. People need to hear that. Medications and infections can induce a diabetic scenario. So can chronic stress. Cortisol, which is the stress hormone, the chronic stress hormone, is a competitor to insulin. The more cortisol you produce, the more resistant your insulin becomes. Now, I'm going to probably touch on the most common cause of insulin resistance, and that is mold and fungal overgrowth.
Interesting.
Fungus produces an acid, and those acids will actually cause your insulin become more resistant. There are some doctors out there who have written books, and they think the majority of problems when it comes to uh, cancers and other things like that are from this buildup of acids. So very, very important to make sure that fungus is not part of your intestinal tract. And guess what feeds fungus?
Sugar.
You got it. Exactly right. So fungus becomes important. And then for some people who live like in moldy homes and their houses that you have mold or mildew, I
Yeah.
want you to really pay attention, because the longer you're in that home, the more you're not going to be able to tolerate the sugar that you are consuming.
Interesting. It's like a cascading effect. And just to be clear, I mean, I know you're talking about simple sugars in things like Cocoa Puffs and things like that, which I think the Diabetes Society or like Harvard Medical School says that that's better for you than beef. But um, I wonder who's paying their bills.
Yes.
So but, but it's not just that, it's foods that convert to sugar, and I think this is a piece that is missing for a lot of people, because they've been told that things like honey are safe foods or agave, or even fruits, and other natural like potatoes, things like that, that if it's not boxed or processed, it's okay, but it actually does convert to sugar. So, I think that's something that, it's it's not always obvious because,
No.
we've been told and trained to think of sugar as those things that are more refined. But don't they act in similar ways in the body, when it comes to fuel and what your body perceives as
They
sugar?
they can, because here's the thing. You can still eat potatoes and get away with it, but they have what's called a higher glycemic index. So sweet
Right,
potatoes actually have a lower glycemic index, but when you have that, there's the potential to be converted to sugar, so you can't have as much. So if you
right.
have low amounts of food, so when you have those types of food,
Mhm.
anything that converts to sugar is like burn first for energy. If you add any type of fat or healthy oils or other things with it, that's when it becomes problematic. So the liver itself, when it's got to be digesting all that food, if you eat too much, that sugar gets stored as glycogen in the liver system, and so you can end up with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is really common in the United States, and that comes from overeating of carbs. Really, it's just overeating of food in general,
Yeah.
and so you can eat those foods in small quantities and get away with it and be okay if you're burning off that fuel for energy, if you're physically active. So if you're eating those things, you have to be moving and using them like
Mhm.
pretty quickly. They're fast burning fuels. But people do need to know, they're like, oh, I don't do a lot of carbs, I don't do a lot of sugar. Well, starchy foods, fruits, for example, I'm a big fan of whole fruits, but generally
Yeah.
speaking, 1 to 2 in a day is the most you want to do. And whole fruits means not fruit juice, because when you drink the juice, that's pure fructose, that's the sugar. And most people don't realize your liver can only handle about 20 grams of fructose. It can't handle a lot of fruit sugars. So
Mm.
high fructose corn syrup is extremely damaging to the liver, because people will have more than 20 grams in a day, and so it becomes
Yeah.
very, very overwhelming to the system. When you have a fruit in its whole form, like an apple, the sugar is bound by fiber, which is like a tree branch with a little
Yeah.
nugget of sugar on there, and the fiber breaks down slowly through the intestinal tract. So that has a low glycemic index because
Mhm.
it takes a while for it to break down, and it delivers the sugars slowly into your body for energy.
Yeah, the interesting thing about the fruits today, though, is that the fruits that we eat have been modified to be
Yeah,
sweeter, right? Like
yeah,
grapes and things like that. I mean, I'm a big fan of berries because they seem to just they're pretty like blueberries and
yeah,
raspberries and things like that are lower. Um, it's fascinating. It's just there's so much to it to unpack, and I think this is one of the reasons that you're here is so that you can help people to develop a curiosity
yeah,
and, to know that there is a place where they can go to get more answers, because everybody has problems. I mean, there's no lack of questions. There's no lack of issues that people are facing. Women's health in particular is just fraught with so many issues, just from the time of puberty on, it's just like this constant hormone storm, right?
yeah,
Childbirth, that there's so many factors that affect women, just stress. Women carry so much stress. And so I'm really grateful that we have a resource like Synapse because it's people are realizing that they just can't get these kind of answers from the traditional setting that they've been told to trust up until now. And that doesn't mean that all doctors are bad.
no,
I think that a lot of them actually have good intentions, and they started out with good intentions. Unfortunately, there's a system that is dictating a lot of the decisions and recommendations that they make for their patients, and until they make a decision to get out of that system, they're limited in what they can do for you and what they can recommend. Is that a pretty fair assessment of the
yeah.
current.
Absolutely. The word I use though is compromise because I personally believe many of them are friends. I just had breakfast today with
Mhm.
one of the top surgeons here in the state, and they are they are really good people trapped in a bad system, and the systems are compromised. And that's not just the healthcare system and medical system. I was asked on a show when I said I wanted to change healthcare. They said, well, "What's the first thing you would do?" And I said, to help everybody's health, I would fire the entire staff of the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration,
Yeah.
and start over.
I would just
Because
abolish it.
yes, because they're not doing a good job.
Yeah.
They've changed and altered our food supply. And that is something that could be used to help nourish ourselves instead of toxify ourselves. So really, really big component is getting the fresh whole fruit. We want food, I should say, and we want to get as much as I'm just going to encourage everyone to buy local as much as you can, organic, buy local for a good percentage of your meals, and then good, clean, quality stuff elsewhere. So if you don't have local stuff, you get as close as you can get. So some of my organic proteins and stuff like that, we have to bring in from outside sources. But a lot of the vegetables and stuff, I like to support a lot of the local organic
Mhm.
farmers. And it was 27 years ago that we kind of fought to get our local co-op established, and now it's a full-blown grocery store, and they are expanding, and people are asking for it. So very, very important because that food you will be shocked at how healthy you feel when you are eating clean organic food. And we have a saying at our clinic: "Don't let age be your cage."
Mhm.
And so we have people in their 60s and 70s doing what people in their 30s and 40s can't do anymore.
That's good. I wanna take this opportunity to give my listeners a couple of options here. I did put the QR code, for your clinic up on the screen just a minute ago. I'm gonna flash it up here again. So this is for anybody that, wants to schedule a free discovery call. You will find out if you're a candidate, for working with Dr. Troy and his team there at Synapse. It's SYNAPSE, officialsynapse.com is the website, and they're in Minnesota, but they actually work with people around the world. You don't have to be limited just to the Great White North to be a patient at Synapse. Also, we have some resources for you here. We are working with American-based companies that can provide some of these very clean foods that Dr. Troy is talking about. One of them is our superfoods. For those of you who are really pursuing fresh, non-GMO, organic, really clean fruits and vegetables, the superfoods that are offered here at Superfood Reset are a great answer to that. They have been molecularly scanned, tested for heavy metals, all the things that you worry about. The nutrient level is beyond anything um, that you're gonna get, in the store or to grow in your backyard. The other one that I wanted to mention is a new partner that I haven't actually featured yet, but this is a company in, Oklahoma that is sourcing American-grown beef, and they are providing, freeze-dried beef. And this is for, off-grid type of living. It's griddownchowdown.com, griddownchowdown.com, and you can just use referral code Mary Grace. Anytime you work with any of these companies, Mary Grace or Mary Grace Media, this is a tremendous resource. They're working with local ranchers to get the cattle that is humanely raised, without all the junk and the crap. And you can eat it as your everyday food, or you can store it really for anywhere from 10 to 15 years or longer because of the way that they source it. And I'm going to put a video up about that. But these are some great resources that you can tap into so that you can get started or even get further along the path of what Dr. Troy is talking about. Last thing I want to mention is if you are not already on my mailing list, if you haven't gotten the notices and you're waiting on the social media platforms to let you know we're live, you don't have to do that. You can go to my website, marygracemedia.com. You can get on the mailing list, and you can also shop at all of the partners that I've mentioned. You can go onto the website, click shop, and then you can just scroll through because we put them all there for you with direct links so that you can go straight to the websites and you don't have to remember all this. The only one you have to remember is marygracemedia.com, and then just click on shop and there you go. Boom. Okay. So here we're back. We're back from that moment. And as I was talking to you, I heard a really loud crash, and I don't know if that was in our house or your house. Um,
No, I'm at my office, so I don't think it's not here.
okay, well, I don't hear any sirens, so I think I think it may have been something that a cat was doing, but we're just gonna move on and hope that it's not a major catastrophe when I'm done here. But everybody knows we've got uh, 2 big yellow cats, and there's no telling. And one of our cats is really hooked on butter, so he may have climbed up and accessed something that was left on the counter. I'm just gonna say that's Billy, who likes butter.
Well, let me
Um
let me comment on that because so Billy probably is doing well with something called butyric acid because butter has butyric acid, which helps fight off and prevent colitis. So
Okay.
Billy's just trying to have a good bowel. So Billy's got good bowels.
Okay, perfect, yeah, I mean, that's yeah. You have to keep the butter covered up in this house, and, we'll just deal with it later, but the other thing I wanted to say is we don't have a big audience tonight. I'm assuming that maybe it's the timing or whatever's happening, but if you are in the live audience on Rumble and or Facebook, that's where I'm monitoring the chat right now. Um, that is where you can post your questions for Dr. Troy Spurrill. So if you have questions and you want to post them, pretty soon here we're going to start he's going to start answering some questions, but it's my turn and I still get to answer questions or ask questions. So we're talking a lot about blood sugar and the ways that your team can help to use different markers to predict things that may be more serious health events for people in the future. One of those things that really is concerning for me is mental health,
Yeah.
whether it's neural pathway type of issues or dementia, Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's has been called type 3 diabetes,
Yeah.
and I'm becoming more and more convinced that that's a good descriptor for it. Can you talk to us a little bit about the types of things that you see and what our listeners can be mindful of as they go get into their, well, not whatever age. I mean, it's never
Yeah.
too soon to start with prevention of this, right?
Well, absolutely. When I was first studying healthcare, I was in pre-med, and they taught, and this was about 35 years ago, 30 years ago, they taught that diabetes, if those who have been around for a bit, there was two names for it: adult onset diabetes and childhood onset diabetes. And adult onset diabetes happened between the age of 50 to 70 and was a lifestyle disorder. And then all of a sudden, people in their 40s started to get it, and then people in their 30s. And so they changed the name to type 1 and type 2, because then people in their 20s were getting it, and then their teens. And now we have many diagnosed cases under the age of 10. And I really want people to hear this. That means that that 10-year-old, or actually 8-year-old is the one that we just saw recently, that 8-year-old basically aged their pancreas to that of a 50 to 70-year-old in just 8 years. So that's a wear and tear. So
Wow.
they did 50 years worth of wear and tear in 8 years. So we're seeing now teenagers and young adults with diabetes, pre-diabetes, when we never saw that until they were in their 50s or their 70s. So really, it's a good thing to do. We actually give out a trophy to the best lab results, um, that from patients, and patients will fight for it. Like they'll say, how close am I, and I want to repeat my labs to beat the other person.
Yeah.
The person who won this last year was 42 years old. She had the best labs of all of our 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 40, 50, 60, and 70-year-olds. And they actually are the best ones we've run since we've been doing this. And so that is something that I don't know. I like when people's competitive side comes out in the I'm going to have good labs area. And so we're seeing that people, because of that too, people in their 20s and 30s want to get checked. And one of my oldest son is in his mid 20s, and uh, his friends started coming in because he would go out and get his labs, and he would just be talking, and he's in the gym and he's working out, and they'd be asking about what he was taking. He says, well, my lab work showed that I need to just tweak my iron and my B vitamins a little bit more so that I could get a little bit more muscle mass and strength.
Mhm.
And they were just blown away by that he knew all of this information. So where he worked asked me to come and do a talk to educate them about, everything that's going on, because he knew more about his body and what was going on inside in his 20s than where he worked, where the older people that worked there, the people that were in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, they were wanting a piece of that because they
Yeah.
were impressed by how much he knew.
That's great. That's amazing. We have a question in the Rumble. I'm gonna come to it in just a minute because I wanna camp out here for a little bit more to talk about brain health,
Yes.
because I think this is a really important issue. So I do see the question on Rumble. We will come back to that. But for now, let's go back to a little bit more talking about brain health because I think this is so critical. This is a piece that people are encountering family members
Yeah.
who are getting earlier and earlier diagnoses with Alzheimer's. They're calling it like early onset Alzheimer's
Yeah.
and dementia. But I believe from the reading that I've done is that it's largely preventable. And the earlier you work to prevent it, the better off because there is some damage that can be irreversible. So
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit about that? I really think that this could save
Absolutely.
not only people's lives, but their sanity and that of their families going forward.
Absolutely. So you're exactly right. The majority of Alzheimer's is reversible, even if you have the bad genetics. So the bad genetics are the ApoE4, E4 genes. So which means you got one bad gene from each parent. Now, there's a book for the listeners. If you want to prevent Alzheimer's, you go get this book. It's called The End of Alzheimer's by Dr. Dale Bredesen, Bredsen. Now, I was trained by Dr. Dale Bredesen on when it came to Alzheimer's. He was a researcher. He goes through this in his book, but he's identified 37 different paths that actually trigger the memory loss or the plaquing of the Alzheimer's and the reasons for that. So blood sugar is one of the main 5 categories of dysfunction that can affect the brain, but there's another 4. And so in that book, he describes what you do to actually help prevent it. And he was a traditional Alzheimer's researcher for 25 years, and he had a breakthrough in the lab. And the short version of the story is that he had worked with the Canadian, US, and Australian governments doing research for 25 years. None of them would actually fund a research project after he had his discovery because they kept telling him, you have to find one medication to address the whole thing. And that's when he realized they will never find a cure for Alzheimer's because the science is wrong, because there's 37 different pathways that can trigger this. You'll never get one medication that can address all 37 for everyone, and therefore it'll never statistically significantly help the majority of people. So he turned to functional medicine. And in our clinic, we have over a dozen reversals of Alzheimer's. And I will say this, when we catch it with people in their 50s, we have a high level of success in treating it and improving their memory. The oldest person we had was someone who had trouble with blood sugar. He was 82 at the time. He couldn't button his shirt. He forgot his family members' names, couldn't carry on a conversation. All of that came back. He got it all back. He was able to dress himself. He
Wow.
enjoyed playing pool. He could carry on a conversation.
Yeah.
The whole family basically said, "We've got our father back." So that's a little surprising in your 80s. It's much harder to work with and treat. Um, I got to be careful I say this one. We're treating people in their 40s right now who were injured by the
The jibber jabber.
yes, you got it. And it induced an Alzheimer's or dementia in
Wow.
them in their 40s. And
Wow.
we're
Mm.
uh, this the patient that I'm speaking of was basically had a concussion and was predisposed to the injury, so it never should have gotten it, and is currently in a clinical study at the Mayo, where they're assessing him in a group of other individuals, and he's not declining like everyone else. He's actually maintaining and making steps forward. He's the only one in the study. So he's an outlier. And when they look at what is he doing, the difference is he's working with us, and we're trying to keep everything else afloat to help the brain in all the different areas that we've measured. The sugar was a key part of it, and this hit perfect candidate for what we do because
Yeah.
of just the amount of sugar consumption, the reactivity to molds, the actual concussion itself. So having healing from that was very important. So just like we're seeing more and more diabetes, we're seeing more and more memory issues.
Mhm.
Sugar's one of them. Inflammation's another one, and there
Don't
are
they kinda go hand in hand though
they
too? I
they
mean,
do, yeah.
yeah.
But other
Okay.
things cause inflammation as well. So
Right.
you can have the sugar being an issue, but you can also have other inflammatory
Mhm.
problems. There's vascular and there's hormone. If your hormones change too quickly, it can actually induce a memory challenges. It's called atrophic change.
You know, I think any woman who's been through rapid hormonal changes will
Yeah.
tell you that,
Yes.
whether it's childbirth, menopause, I mean,
Yep.
yeah, there's things that are happening hormonally, so I think that's yeah, I think most people would recognize that. This is fascinating, and I think that, I know it's just, my head is kind of trying to get around it because to hear you say that people have been affected by certain medical interventions that for most people weren't even necessary, and everybody here knows what I'm talking about. People didn't need it, but were frightened into taking it, coerced, whatever the reason, here we are. And so it is gratifying to know that your team is looking for answers and in many cases providing answers for people who have been in that situation. And I would presume also people who have longer ongoing symptoms
Yes.
as a remnant from having caught whatever they called it.
Yes.
Um, so it's crazy that we have to speak in code here, but everybody knows what we're talking about. Everybody knows somebody who has been affected, even if it's you, not you. I
Yeah.
mean, all of us have in one way or another. And so 4 years in, here we are, almost to the day of this thing changing the world in such a drastic way. But people like Dr. Troy Spurrill and his team over at Synapse have answers, and this is why it's so important. If you're listening right now, please share this. It does look like we're getting pretty low viewership. More people are coming online on Rumble. Um, we're on YouTube, we're on Twitter, we're on CloudHub, we're also right here on Facebook. And so please share it and tag people because this is such critical information. And if you missed the live, that's okay. Come back. Let us know that you were here. Let us know your comments. Let us know your thoughts. And do be sure and follow the channel. And then also subscribe to my mailing list, which is right here at marygracemedia.com. But most importantly, I really want to urge everybody here tonight to take a step. Go to officialsynapse.com, official synapse.com. And you can call them too. They have a phone number. It's 651 209 9906. 651 209 9906. If you're like me, kind of old school, like Gen X bordering on boomer, you like the phone. So, just call them. You don't have to do everything online. But this is just really important, and I see people scanning the code, so I just hope that people are gonna take this step. It really could save your life to get this information and to work with a team like this. So I just really wanna encourage everybody, and thank you everybody for sharing all of this information. It's really tremendous. I know that some of you have already taken advantage of this free consultation, and I just wanna urge more and more of you to do it. There's no pressure to sign up. Just call. Just go down your laundry list with them and say, "Hey, can you help me?" And I think this is a good time to switch over now to take a couple of questions. Are you up for that?
Absolutely. It's my
Okay.
favorite part, actually.
Okay, so let me get to the Rumble, and again, for people who are not here, if you're watching on the replay, be sure and bookmark our next session because we're gonna do these Q&As with Dr. Troy when he comes on, and so if you want to get your question featured in the live stream, we won't answer them on the replay, in the chat. You can get in touch with them, but we'll feature your questions on the live stream as time allows. So make sure you show up live. Okay, so here's a question on Rumble. This is from FR24E for free, something like that. Any ideas on how to stop a very rare myelofibrosis from progressing along with leukemia? That sounds like an acute situation.
Yeah. So that is a tough one. That's already well advanced. I am going to um, uh, just talking about that can be difficult. So you have to look at what systems are not working. So I'm going to give you an example. For something like that, there's something that's affecting the blood, and there's something potentially affecting the bone and the bone marrow. So you have to identify what is that problem and see if you can remove it. For example, I have had that scenario end up being like a DDT exposure when this woman was young. It didn't manifest into a problem until she was in her 50s, but she would run in the fields as they sprayed DDT. So there's a scenario there. Also, without getting something like that that's already diagnosed, you have to look at um, some of the foundational stuff and see what you can treat. Now, having said that, there are two things that I actively know help just in general protect our DNA. One of them is B17 that can be used, and the other one is chlorine dioxide that can actually help with reactive oxidative species. Chlorine dioxide is actually what they use to purify the water when people go camping. So
Right.
it's not a lot. You just use a little bit, but and this is not anything that's been assessed or even studied yet. Well, I should say this: it's being studied as we speak. I just happen to be involved with some of the inner research, and there's no definitive with a question like that. But we do see that there are certain levels of potential impact in a positive way with very little to no harm. So it's low risk, high reward. And when you've got a diagnosis like that, it's very well worth it to at least investigate. So that's where I would look to first, and then like I said, the rest of the other foundational stuff, you have to look at what would have set that off and triggered it, and see if you can then address it at that point. And that can be anything from a chemical toxicity, a viral thing, a heavy metal exposure, something that's foreign to the body that caused some level of disruption or confusion to your immune system, either attacking itself or not protecting itself.
That's wow, that's a lot, and that sounds like that would be a really good candidate for a consultation, just to kind of get more of those medical records in the hands of Dr. Troy and his team so that they could see a history, right? That would be a good example.
Yeah, and
Um,
see if they're a fit or not. Yeah.
yeah, and so here's a question. A few years ago, my husband now so June is asking on Facebook, my husband, 82 years old, stepped on a nail. He went for a tetanus shot. They gave him DPT. Within 2 to 3 weeks, he was in terrible pain. Turns out he developed RA, which I believe is rheumatoid arthritis.
Yes.
He's on methotrexate. He still deals with pain, depression, etc. Are there natural things he can do?
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, it sounds like there was an immune reaction, and then RA. Interestingly enough, we end up having to treat RA as an infection. So a lot we have found personally, this is not across the board, but we have found that a lot of Lyme co-infections, Bartonella, things like that, are actually at the root cause of the triggering of the RA. Now, that's not everything, but if you the common denominator is these small internal infections, and even shots like that, like what he had, it can create an environment that then allows for those infections to actually to live. Now, there's another scenario too where it could be like a pain syndrome, and just the act of the shot or the needle itself was enough to induce it, which generally is referred to as like a complex regional pain syndrome. That would mean that there's something else in the body that is triggering a constant feedback loop that needs to be addressed. Most commonly, it's a digestive system disorder. So we look at both of those areas and just see, is there a feedback loop that's keeping a perpetual pain thing going? Is it an autoimmune scenario? And then you have to go after the actual autoimmunity. And what you use kind of depends. I would look to books, herbal books, if you will, on Lyme, and that gives you some inkling of what you can potentially use, or anything that tends to treat Bartonella. Funny enough, guess what? I think I can say this. Guess guess what treats a lot of those things successfully? Hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, antiparasitics or zinc ionophores. So they're known to treat lupus type scenarios. That's what they're given for, as far as lupus and some of these other um, weird autoimmune scenarios. And so that kind of fits in that exact same category.
Interesting. Wow. I'm learning a lot. I'm trying to look at the questions as well. So now we have 2 questions about blood, and one of them has to do with, there's been a lot in the news lately. Those of us who were called conspiracy theorists were told that there was that our concerns about, blood transfusions and blood donations were completely unfounded because the juice would not affect the blood supply. Now we know that the Red Cross is actually, questioning people when they sign up to give blood, and if they say that, yes, they had the jibber jabber, then they have to call and go through a questionnaire to determine if they are eligible. And so one of our questions is, what about the blood supply, and how can people safeguard that if they do need blood? And the next question, which may come into this, is, Aaron on Facebook says, "My wife has really thick blood. What is causing that?" So, blood supply, no juice, juice, and then thick blood.
All right, let me start with thick blood. So
Okay.
there is a process or a diagnosis called hemochromatosis. So you would get it passed down from a parent. It's more likely in men than women, but she may have hemochromatosis. It's basically a pretty benign disorder. You just donate blood. Hemochromatosis means your blood can't get rid of the iron efficiently, and so you just the secret is to donate blood. If you don't, then the iron builds up and it starts to affect your organs, specifically the liver and potentially the heart. So blood donation helps a lot for that scenario. If it's hemochromatosis, you can go to your doctor, they'll check for the genetics of that. The more common and more likely scenario is that our blood becomes thick when we're dehydrated, or we have too much iron, like I said, from inflammation. So inflammation causes your body to hang on to iron. So one of our tests for inflammation is something called C-reactive protein, but we also check ferritin. Ferritin is iron stores. When ferritin stays consistently high, it's almost always an inflammatory reaction. So what's causing the inflammation? Is it diet? Is it an infection? Is it a shot or something like that that can cause inflammation? We know that a lot of different things can cause inflammation when it comes to infections, but food is also very common. Find the inflammatory source. The most common cause of that in women, though, is dehydration and omega-3 deficiency, omega-3 fatty acid deficiency. So, fatty acids are a natural blood thinner. I'm going to give you a little scoop here. Drink lots of water. So whatever you're drinking, if you're 100 pounds, you want to be consuming 50 ounces of water. If you're 200 pounds, you want to be consuming closer to 90 ounces of water. I want you to ease up to half your body weight in ounces of water. So 150 pounds would be about 70, 75 ounces of water, and consume 1 teaspoon of olive oil, organic olive oil, every day. And that'll help the blood flow quite a bit. And then find out what's causing the inflammation. So the first part of your question was, yeah, maybe we should go back to it. Do you still have it
Yeah,
there?
yeah, so tell us about, the whole situation with blood that's been jibber-jabbered and blood that hasn't been
So
when it
I,
comes to donating blood or
yeah, I
transfusion.
almost opened up a blood clinic when this started going down, because I knew that we were going to need pure blood at some point.
Yeah.
And what we now know is that the protein, the spike, will actually be toxic
Mhm.
to the system. So that's why they're checking it. It is inflammatory. It will actually cause some other damages. There are a couple of um, international blood donation systems that have started up.
Okay.
So I believe one is literally called Safe Blood, and
Mhm.
so they're just in its infancy, though, and so hospitals aren't using them. Smaller clinics, maybe. We're talking with surgeons and other people right now about the possibility of what that might look like down the road. Right now, there is nothing in place, no system in place for anything like that. But what I can say is this: you can actually cleanse the blood. Your immune system can help it. There are things out there like nattokinase and lumbrokinase, when taken properly, can help
Mhm.
to actually clean the blood up too. And in time, a healthy bloodstream can do quite well. So even if you got what we call contaminated blood to save your life, and it's worth it. But there'll be many of us pushing for a safe supply and safe facilities. And right now they don't fully exist, but I've had conversations with people who are implementing them as we speak.
Okay, that's good to know. That was a great question.
Yeah.
Let me just check the questions here a little bit. I think, one of my questions is, can at this point, can people, save their own blood? Um, can they do that? Is there a way to do that?
Well, it has to be at a blood bank. It is a little
Mhm.
more expensive, but yes, you can do that. And it just depends where you are. And so you can call a local blood bank and say you'd like to store it, but then you have to pay for the storage fees.
Okay.
Uh, so
Yeah, you may be, better off just getting gold and silver
yeah,
and storing that.
right.
So, uh, it's interesting, back, in 2021, I was talking to a friend who had recently had a baby, and she had excess breast milk, she was selling it, and they got a notice, from the company that she was working with that they would not take any breast milk that had from anyone who had received that, injection.
Yeah,
So that was like, "Oh, wait, I thought it wasn't
I know.
being transmitted." Yeah, so but the company, they weren't taking any chances. Here's a question on X. I think this is our first audience participation over on X. Yay, that means people are seeing the show. Uh, and even though they have a heavy suppression algorithm on my channel over there. If you are watching on X, please repost this. That would be great. Okay, so what is your advice about Jody wants to know what's your advice about consuming alcohol, including wine? Now, this is a pretty broad question,
Yeah.
so maybe I guess a lot depends. There depends on a lot of things, but you go take that question.
Yeah. So, generally speaking, alcohol, for the most part, is damaging. It's a toxin. So I want people to kind of think of it that way first. For the majority of it. However, it also is something that is what's called a GABA agonist. So GABA is the anti-worrying brain chemical. So wine is basically a fermented process, and fermented foods are actually good for us. Spirits are not fermented, so that's different. So there is a difference. So a shot of vodka is very different than wine per se. Now vodka doesn't have the sugar content; it's different. It's alcohol sugars. So in general, we consider a alcohol in the toxin category in general. Having said that, wine can be very healthy for people when it comes to their heart, and if it's in moderation. But you have to know your body. And so there are most people, if you're consuming sugars a lot during the day, you shouldn't have any alcohol. So it's one of those things that can really offset it in a bad way. And so here's the thing to also know. When people have stress, what do they crave? Salt and sugar. What is the number one sugar craving for women? Chocolate. What's the number one sugar craving for men? Alcohol. It's a
Interesting.
sugar craving. So if you're craving it, then that's more of a sign of stress. So it should never be something you need. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
It also is something that has been around for a long time, and it was Jesus' first miracle. So we know that it was something
Yeah.
that's been around for a while, and and the fermentation process. Now, I'm just going to say this: what was around 2,000 years ago is not the same as what's around now. Fermented grapes that were 2,000 years ago, the fermentation process is very, very different right now. But the problem
Interesting.
is the majority of people can't tolerate it because they already have a buildup of yeast. So when you have fermented things, because that's what they use is yeast, then they're already out of balance. So if you're in balance, and the funny thing is, generally speaking, the people that would be okay to have alcohol are the ones that don't ever care to ever have it. And the ones who really kind
Yeah.
of want it are the ones who probably should get rid of it.
Interesting, interesting. Yeah, it's I think too, alcohol, it does trigger adrenaline, which
Yep.
leads to spikes in cortisol, and so the after effects of, of alcohol can be damaging just because, it affects your sleep. I mean, it might
Yep.
feel good in the moment, but the cascading effect of it can certainly be unpleasant, and people attribute it to all kinds of things like anxiety or whatever, but it's usually because of those spikes. And most people, they drink in the evening, which is
Yeah.
not a time that you want your adrenaline to spike, right?
No, it causes insulin resistance, and so uh,
Yeah.
in the rare cases, it can help people get into deeper sleep, but 95% of the time, it disrupts their sleep. And
Okay.
so if for people who actually have Aura rings and different devices that
Yeah.
measure their sleep now, Just watch what happens when you have alcohol before bed, and you'll see how the level of sleep just completely gets disrupted. And funny enough, for my younger patients, the ones in their 20s, that is what, when they see that, that's what causes them to stop drinking. Not their parents saying stop drinking, not scripture, not anything. It's not the church. It's their aura ring, or their ring that measures their
Yeah.
sleep, and they look and say, holy smokes, I didn't even get into deep sleep last night. And so
Wow.
the
Wow.
research is pretty intriguing.
It's an interesting tool. So the question that Jody had was really specifically alcohol related to Alzheimer's, like if it's something that triggers Alzheimer's. And Jody, you might have missed the earlier part of our conversation about sugar in general as related to Alzheimer's. But I think I imagine it certainly could be a factor, right?
Yeah, so it in the beginning, no, but long-term use, yes, because it
Okay.
starts to make a key area of the brain, or cerebellum, which uses the brain chemical GABA. Alcohol is a GABA agonist, so the cerebellum becomes more deficient. All learning goes through the cerebellum, the coordination of thought and the coordination of movement. So that's why you see with people like alcoholics, they're shaky, and they become more shaky in their movements, but it's also shaky in their thoughts. So it induces insulin resistance. So it very much contributes to memory loss in the majority of people with chronic alcohol use.
Interesting. Okay. And there was somebody here who asked about inflammation. I'm trying to find your question. Sometimes they jump around, but the gist of the question was like, how do you know that you have inflammation? And how is it? Oh, here we go. Jean on Facebook. How do you find out why you have inflammation? What type of test? Do you go to a dermatologist, an allergist, a rheumatologist? No, you go to a
No.
functional medicine doctor,
Yes. No,
like
but
Dr.
here's the
Spurrill.
crazy thing. Everyone you just mentioned there, the answer is no, no, no. That's
The yes is on the screen, Doctor
all right. Yeah.
Synapse.
Let me share with you though, what, just to take note. So inflammation, when you go to the gym and you work out for the very first time, your muscles are sore, they become inflamed, and then you clear out that inflammation. Now, some of it is acid. So we're also talking about like lactic acid buildup and stuff like that. It literally is like a burning. So you have muscle soreness that should get better over 2 to 3 days. So as we age, the biggest pet peeve I have is that people say, I get out of bed and my muscles are achy and sore. That's inflammation. And it clears up slowly as I start to move. That's still inflammation. And they say it's because I'm getting older. And I've had people say it in my 70s and 80s. That's understandable. I've had people say it in their 60s and 50s. Not as much understandable. I've had people say that in their 40s and 30s. Definitely shouldn't have that. So, also, if you do exercise, you should recover in 1 to 3 days properly. If you don't, that's inflammation. Headaches, over 50% of them are inflammatory. So if you get headaches, that's inflammation. So there's a lot of signs. Now I'm going to briefly go through some of the blood work. Cardiac reactive protein, or CRP, is a direct marker for one type of inflammation. ESR, or it's called a SED rate. That is another test for inflammation. Then you've got things like ferritin, I talked about before. When it's too high, that is an indicator for inflammation. And then you can have different acids build up, like uric acid. When it gets too high, we have gout. But all these other acids can be elevated, and they can induce inflammation as well.
Hold on, I muted myself. So another question, this is a really good question. Debbie on Facebook says, if we call, can you refer to functional medicine doctors around the country? Um,
It's a great question. So the answer is yes, if we know of someone that we've worked with personally. So right now, well, today we just onboarded a PA from Oklahoma, who is going to be running functional medicine for a couple different states for us. So it depends what state you're in, and we try and if we don't deal with you directly, we try and find someone. But the problem is we don't know all the functional medicine practitioners, and There are a lot of people who claim to be functional medicine who aren't. A lot of doctors who just want to get out of the mainstream, and they claim to be functional medicine, but they aren't, and they're using mainstream as well. So we've vetted a few of them. We can work with people. We have patients from all 50 states and from 12 countries right now, and we always encourage you to find someone local. So once we onboard people, we try and we're a lot of times we're consultants, so that we will look someone up and say, this person's local to you. We could always act as a consultant if they're your primary, and then we can tell within 2 or 3 visits if they know if they're worth their salt when it comes to functional medicine, and then we work with them that way. So we will do our best. This is what I can tell you. Even when I first started treatment with patients, I never promised people I'd get them better. I promised that they'd never find someone that would work harder for them. And that fits with that question, that if there's someone local, local is always better. And so if we can find someone local, great. Having said that, we've got some uniquenesses and some things we've developed because we've been doing it for 30 years. So some people will fly in here once or travel here once and then work. We'll know exactly what they need and then work with their local practitioner. So I love that question, because my dream is to have functional medicine in every state, not us running it. I don't have time for that. To have that be the new healthcare model.
Um, that was a good question.
Yeah.
I'm gonna switch over to Rumble now. I don't wanna neglect my Rumble people. So Mary Tack on Rumble says, "I have candida, which has coated my tongue white, not thrush. Was told it could be age or acid reflux. I've tried multiple things. What can I do?" And this person also mentions, diverticulitis. So it sounds like those 2 things are happening to
Yeah,
Mary Tack. Maybe they're related.
they are. So I'll say that this is not specific to your case. I can't diagnose you just based on that, but this is the most common thing we see, and that is diverticulitis, which is inflammatory, and it's a weakening of the intestinal tract. The intestinal tract's a muscle. So if you don't have a nerve firing to a muscle, it gets weak, right? So if we don't have a nerve firing to our arm muscle, we get atrophy. Same thing with our digestive system. And so what that means is the most common cause of that is chronic fight or flight. If you're in fight or flight, you can't be in rest and digest. This fight or flight is like a tiger's chasing you. If a tiger's chasing you, it's a horrible time to take a nap or sit down and eat lunch. Your brain doesn't support those areas. So the nerve, which is the vagus nerve, doesn't support your digestive system. What you end up getting when the vagus nerve doesn't support the digestive system is acid reflux. But you have low stomach acid, not high. It's refluxing because the stomach valve is weak. So a sleep disorder can cause that. A chronic underlying infection can cause the fight or flight. Stressful relationships can cause it, or just um, not being able to surrender in the day, too much cortisol, not enough of the hormone balance. So the way you correct that is with a what we call a SIBO program, or a low FODMAP program, but it is basically where you support the digestive system, identify if there's a sleep disorder causing the fight or flight, or a stress disorder of some sort, identifying the underlying stress. And I'm just going to say this may or may not be pertinent to you, but healing begins after forgiveness. So if I say the word forgiveness and someone pops to mind, that's what you work on right now, and then you may not even need us. It's that significant.
Now you're bringing in our good friend Praying Medic here, because this is something that he mentions. He talks about this a lot. So for my people who've listened to my segments with Praying Medic, who has actually written books on emotional healing and physical healing, this is a big thing that he talks about. When you're praying for people, when people are praying for healing, a lot of times it just doesn't click if there's unforgiveness.
Yep.
So yeah, yeah, and
We've
this is
we've measured that with lab work. We've
wow.
measured putting people on a very strict diet, and it didn't change their lab work until forgiveness was onboarded.
Wow.
We have documented proof of that.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're going to deeper levels now, but really profound levels that make a difference.
Yeah.
Um, wow, that's really good. Kim was asking again about what type of tests you can do and how you can test to know where the inflammation is coming from. So, Kim, he did talk about that in response to another question earlier. After this stream ends, you can go back and rewind because he went into some details about that. So, Kathy on Facebook is asking about the best natural product for gout. And she said, I would be willing to pay for a phone consult for my son. Is that possible?
Yes, it's always possible to have phone consult. I do have a favorite product for gout, and I usually don't like tout too many things. But funny enough, I've got it on my desk right now, so it's funny she asked that. So that means that there's a reason. So Orthomolecular has a product called UAX Pro. And I do believe you have to have a doctor or someone licensed with them to recommend it, but that is the actual product. UAX Pro stands for uric acid X Pro. And the other thing is, if there is gout, you have to make sure there's no alcohol, fructose, or high sugar that's being consumed, because that's what causes gout, along with mild dehydration. So, like salt and vinegar potato chips or salty chips
Mhm.
are actually one of the sneaky things that can cause gout. Alcohol is also part of that conversation.
Interesting. Okay, so Jody is back on X and she has another question. It sounds like maybe this is from personal experience. Is it normal for a functional medical medicine doctor to say, keep your internist because we don't see sick patients? I'm
Ooh, I would say no. Um, well, okay, so yes, because we still need the traditional system. There are a lot of good people within the system, and there's need for them. I'm actually working with people right now to just work on what that looks like, because functional medicine should be the first line, second line therapy. So what I'm assuming that particular functional medicine doctor was saying is you still may need a third line therapy, and that's what they should be. I still refer out for surgeries. I still refer out to get very specific testing in the traditional world
okay.
with the right people. 80% of the people, though, we can actually work with, even if they have an active disease process. And what we're finding is there are more and more things that do clear up if we get it sooner. But even if we get it late, there are some things that we can still have home runs with. I had a patient recently that had a condition for 30 years and had been to a lot of traditional doctors and functional medicine doctors, and she's now symptom free, and it's been 30 years. And it was, you're actually going to meet her. I'll introduce you to it because she will be down in
Okay.
where we're meeting. So
That's amazing. I'm so glad you asked that question, Jody. I really that was a really good question because I think especially I think internists can be actually some of the good ones.
yeah,
Um,
there are a lot of really good, gifted doctors that are still able to operate really well, even within a broken system.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, and we're definitely not here to bash
No,
doctors per se. There's a system that is really dysfunctional, by design, and there are people who are I don't even know if dysfunction it's a captured system.
yeah,
And so, that is, that's something that Dr. Troy and others are working to change. I
yeah,
think we're gonna take one more question here, and that is gonna be from Sylvia on Facebook. Please address candida. Now that's a loaded question. So can you give us a brief little synopsis on that?
yeah. Candida is very similar. So it is like thrush, and it is a yeast. And so Candida is kind of like what I talked about before. When we have low stomach acid, then we don't break down the food properly, and the pH of our intestinal tract starts to change. So bad things grow. It's kind of like the pH of your garden versus the pH of your driveway. Weeds will grow in the driveway because the pH is right for the weeds, but not right for the garden. And so the same thing, candida will grow in excess. Now you do have a small amount in your body all the time. So it will grow in excess when the pH of your intestines is not right. That means if you're not making enough stomach acid because of long-term stressors, that can do it. Overconsumption of sugars can do it. Overuse of antibiotics creates candida. So these are different things that can set it up. It can be very hard to treat and get rid of, and some people have a genetic predisposition where they have an inability to use their B vitamins as efficiently, as effectively, and it makes them more prone to chronic candida, even if they're doing everything else right. So, or chronic candida or yeast. So the first thing is you can't get rid of it without um, going sugar-free during the process. Berberine is my favorite anti-candida supplement because it does two things. It actually pulls the sugar out of the blood and helps deliver it into the cell. So it helps with insulin resistance, and it helps to kill off the candida. And so the medications for that are anti-candida can be a little bit hard on the kidneys, but they can be effective. We do use them sometimes. Nystatin and diflucan are the two that generally are used, but you only can use them for short periods of time. And sometimes the 1 or 2 week intervals of use is not enough.
Mhm.
So we have more success in a natural process where you get them 21 days of not eating. And I'll tell you what, when you have candida, the sugar cravings are off the charts for these people.
Yeah, I've heard that. By the way, a lot of the things that Dr. Troy is mentioning, if you want to purchase them, I know that some of you might be going online searching these things. I wanted to remind you that I actually do have a wellness store where you can purchase a lot of these herbal remedies and nutraceuticals, and that is right. You can access it from my website. Just go to marygracemedia.com, go on the shopping tab, and then go down to my wellness store. It looks like this on the website. So you can click straight through to the wellness store, or you can go from my website to get there. But it's a great resource. We have discounts for first time orders, and then you can also get on subscription. And so it's very similar to what you would do with the subscribe and save with other companies. And I sometimes forget to mention that, but I do have customers there, and it's a good place to look for these types of supplements. And if there's something you're looking for and we don't have it in the store, just email me info@marygracemedia.com and I will get it added to the store. We have thousands of SKU numbers. We just don't all have them, available all the time. Sometimes it's just by request, but that's something I wanted to remind people of. So berberine was the one that you mentioned. Just
Love it.
go to my website. I think it also helps with blood sugar as well, right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah,
Exactly.
so it's, go to marygracemedia.com, click on shop, and then go straight to the wellness store, and then on the way, you're gonna see Synapse because that's on my website too. So let's just see if we have any more comments here. We've got the audience has livened up now that it's getting later and we're gonna have to go soon. I think we're good. I think that this has been incredible, so valuable, really just such a my brain is getting kind of full, so it's probably good that we're
Yeah.
signing off. Let me just check the Rumble. I think we're good, yeah. So for those of you, like I said, if you're here live, I really appreciate you participating live. If for some reason you're watching on the replay, it always helps when you leave a comment, when you hit the hearts and the likes, when you share this. All of that interaction helps. It helps to push the video up in the feed. It also helps when you share it to your wall on Facebook and things like that. All of that interaction helps the algorithm. And then also, if you do come back and you have questions, it's not likely that I'm going to be able to answer your questions in the chat. So I do encourage you to contact Dr. Troy and his team for a free consultation. It's a discovery call. And the number is 651-209-9906. 651-209-9906, or you can just scan the QR code, or you can go to officialsynapse.com, and that is an easy way to get in touch with them. It's just like I said, it's a free discovery call, so why not ask the question, and if it's a good fit for you to work with him and his team, they'll tell you, and if it's not a good fit, hopefully they can give you some other options. So, is there anything else that you want to add before we sign off tonight, Dr. Troy?
No, I would just say that if you go to the website too, we do have a lot of educational videos, and I think We spend more than any other country in the world when it comes to healthcare, and we don't even rank in the top 50 for health. And so the only way we get out of that mess is to educate ourselves and educate the youth. So
Yeah.
educate ourselves first, and then educate the youth. So just keep learning, everyone. I think it's very, very important, and so we focus on that. We have a lot of educational videos that we try and put out to help people, and so I just appreciate the
Doing good.
time. I appreciate all of your listeners. They do ask really good questions. So
I got a Rumble rant from Maritech. Thank you. I appreciate that. That was awesome. And if you're on YouTube, I think you can do super chat. I'm still just learning YouTube because I was banned for 2 years. So
it's a good sign.
I got in YouTube jail a couple weeks ago because somebody used that third rail word
Yeah.
in a random, comment on a 2-hour video. I was like, "Really? That's the only thing you honed in on?" Yeah, so if you know how to do that on YouTube, go for it. But this has just been tremendous, and, like I said, I am gonna see Dr. Troy in just less than 2 weeks, actually, down in Oklahoma. We're gonna be at one of Clay Clark's events, so I'm very excited about that, and we will be back here. We're trying to do this roughly once a month, and so if you have questions that can't wait, please, get in touch with them because I'm not the, oracle for the answers that you need. I am just the vehicle to give you access to the people who can help you, and that's something that I really love to do. So it's officialsynapse.com, and this is Dr. Troy Spurrill. Thank you so much for being here. I am gonna, play us out with my nice little ad. So good night, everybody. Thank you for being here. Don't leave because I have this beautiful ad, and it's gonna play this time. Thanks, Dr. Troy.
Thank you.
I'm Mary Grace, and I am one of the biggest fans of MyPillow because they have quality America First products that are just made right here in the country, and they last. We have the towels, and I have a big issue with towels that shrink up after the first washing. The MyPillow towels stay color fast, they stay in shape, and they stay that way for years after repeated washings. You can't ask for better. Plus, they actually work. When somebody buys from MyPillow using the promo code Mary Grace, that does a couple of things. It brings in a little bit of an affiliate commission to our company, and it helps us to pay the bills, keep the lights on, keep the internet going, travel to places that we do to give you remote content. And it also helps MyPillow by giving them the support of people who genuinely value quality and companies that support real people right here in the United States and employ people all over this country and give back to this country. Go directly to mypillow.com, use promo code Mary Grace, and buy everything you need for the home. There's no need to spend time shopping anywhere else. Go to mypillow.com, use promo code Mary Grace, get your towels, pillows, sheets, robes, dog beds, pet beds, cat beds, whatever it is that you want for the home. Go to mypillow.com, promo code Mary Grace. It's easy. Don't waste your time anywhere else. Mypillow.com, promo code Mary Grace. Thank you. Listen, your health is your best investment. We have a country to save, and we need people who are in the best shape of their lives, physically, mentally, spiritually. Why not connect with a team who cares about you on every single level from the inside out? Official Synapse is that team. Officialsynapse.com. It's official, synapse.com. Tell them Mary Grace sent you, and they will treat you like family. If you're like most people, you really probably haven't thought about transferring your paper dollars into physical gold and silver. But I want to tell you a story. My friend Andrew Sorcini over at Beverly Hills Precious Metals, he recently went overseas and he wanted to buy a watch. He likes fine watches. He took 3 currencies with him. He took gold, he took Bitcoin, and he took American dollars. Now, there used to be a time when the American dollar was king. I remember that when I used to travel overseas. Everybody wanted dollars. The people that he was dealing with would not take his dollars because the dollar is so devalued around the world. They wanted the gold. So this is what I recommend to you. I want you to think about this. If you have cash in the bank, if you have an investment account that you have worked hard for years to accumulate, consider the value of converting that money into physical gold and silver. You're not buying something that's losing value. You're changing those worthless dollars into a tangible physical asset that will go up in value, which it has done historically. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to go to bh-pm.com. The first thing you're going to do is schedule that free consultation. Second thing, just think rationally about this, pray about it, go to the Lord, see what the best decision for you and your family is. I can't tell you that. I don't want to pressure you into that. What I do know is don't be scared, be prepared. And so the third thing you want to do is make a decision for you and your family. Make a decision, take action. bh-pm.com. Let them know Mary Grace sent you. I just want to give a shout out to everybody who watches this show. Thank you for being a participant. Thank you for being a loyal audience member. I just want to remind you, if you like what you've seen, please share this and don't forget to subscribe, turn on your notifications, and also sign up for my email list so you never miss a show.